Hello students, my name is Dr. Cordova. I am your instructor for Motor Development 6213. I am going to be recording the first 4 chapters lectures because I am not in the States. Therefore, I have to do the recording. I would ask you to watch the recording as well as have those slides that I have uploaded on Blackboard with you, so that way you could kind of look at them and write notes as we go on through this. And when I come back on June 5th, on that June 6th, we'll meet face-to-face. Also, please look at the syllabus. On the syllabus, there is a tentative schedule, and you will notice on the tentative schedule the days that we will be meeting online and the days that we'll be meeting face-to-face. But I will go over that once I return. So we will be looking at lifelong motor development. If you look at these 4 textbook covers, they all look at different lifespans. We have young children with elderly people, so that's supposed to convey that we will be looking at the whole life process. So when we look at developmental systems perspective, we are going to be looking at what causes change, whether that's in the biology or in the environment. And there's a lot of factors that count for this, whether it is the genetic makeup that you get from your parents or the actual environment that your parents put you in. These things will have an effect on how you develop across time. Another way that we can look at this is to look at the quality or the study of change, the quality or the quantity of change. We can look at it from based on a number, on the quantity. For example, how tall you were, how much weight you have gained, how much weight you have lost, how much lean muscle mass you've gained. Or we can look at it from a quality standpoint, so the behavior of it, how mature you are in those fundamental skills. So when we look at motor development, we're looking at change. And the 3 comprehensive areas are these 3 that are highlighted here: growth, development, and motor behavior. When you look at growth, we're looking at size. So how big, how small the size is of an individual compared to functioning. So how strong, how quick, how fast. Or we can look at it from a performance standpoint, which is what kind of behavior do you exhibit, whether it's a mature or immature form. We will be looking at the lifespans perspective. So we look, like I said in the beginning, we will be looking at young children all the way to old age. We will be looking at different disciplines. You're not going to be responsible to know the Krebs cycle, the physiology, and things like that. But we are going to be looking at certain aspects of that and to get a basic understanding of that. So 5 goals of the developmental list is to describe change. When does it occur? What causes the change? Can change be predicted? And is change individually or is it universal across populations? So these are the questions that we always tend to ask. One of the ones that is really has a lot of attention right now is what is causing change. We know in our current culture that there's a lot of changes going on, and there's a lot of research as to what is causing these changes to occur. And these changes are, like I said, it's either from a biology standpoint or from an environmental context standpoint. So there's a lot of things that take into consideration about what makes that certain individual develop a certain way and to behave a certain way. Is it because of their genes, their genetic makeup, their heredity, their self-organizing properties, or is it because of the environmental influences that the individual has? And of course, there's an interaction between these 2. And so we would look into this, and this class is going to be this whole context of this class is to look at these 2 venues, which is the environmental context and the biological content. Under biology, of course, we have heredity. You guys know this, genotype and phenotype. We have this maturation, this internal table that individuals have. We know that motor behavior looks at learning and control. We will look at some aspects of that. We'll look at the general pattern of development, like cephalocaudal, proximal, distal. We'll look at environmental context, such as an affordances. Those are environmental opportunities. And of course, we're always going to be looking at it from what is developmentally appropriate. So what is supposed to be happening? How successful are these individuals supposed to be at? And of course, the other part of this is the aging process. So we know that we all age at certain aspects. So some of the assumptions that we have is that we develop certain ways. We could either look at development from a very continuous standpoint or from a very discontinuous standpoint, meaning that there's different distinct stages in our life as we age, as we develop. All these domains are related, interrelated, so we know that psychology, cognition, biology, physiology, anatomy, all of those things are related to each other. We know that there's individual differences, and we know that the environment plays a major role in how we develop. And of course, there's critical and sensitive periods. These are periods in our lives where we will be more sensitive to harm, and there's other windows of our opportunity, these critical periods where we will excel if we were to get introduced to a certain aspect in the environment. So we also assume that if you are given a lot of positive stimulation, a lot of experiences, then that individual is going to excel in that. We know that our brain has this notion of plasticity, meaning that it could be adaptable to situations, and it does in fact adapt. We know that our motor development is a dynamic process, that it is self-organizing, and depending on what is introduced, that's how we change. We know that regression is going to happen no matter what you do. We could try to minimize those effects of regression, but we know that we are going to regress as soon as we get to a certain age. And then again, here it is that environment and biology play an important role. So when I was referring to how we develop as the continuum, we could either do it from a phase perspective. The phase perspective is the one here on the left. You could look at it from how we behave, whether it's our behavior like reflexive behavior or spontaneous behavior or rudimentary behavior, and how we end up getting better or refinement of that, and how we ended up peaking at that. The other part of this is, the other way that we can look at it is from a stage perspective. And these are distinct stages, so we know when certain individuals are at our prenatal stage, as that means that they're conceived and they are before they are born. As soon as they're born, they jump into the next stage. They could never go back, so it's very discontinuous. So once you are born, you are no longer considered prenatal, but you are an infant. And it goes on and on. So think of stages as like ages, so very distinct from one point to another. So why do we need to know this? Well, because of research. We know what works. We know what factors play into this. You guys are here in San Antonio, I assume, and you guys have probably been watching the Spurs. We lost. And so in sporting venues, there's a lot of research that happens. We end up finding out statistics on what each player does, what each player contributes to the team. So it's research in a way that we need to know what's going on. We need to understand how people perform, what can we do to improve on them, and of course the knowledge, gain knowledge of that. There's a lot of ways that we can look at research. We can look at it from collecting of this data, either in certain designs. We could do a cross-sectional. That means that certain age groups come in, same time period, but they're coming in we have a whole bunch of 3-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 9-year-olds. And that's a cross-sectional. A longitudinal study will be where you could follow that 3-year-old when they are 6, and then you bring them back to the lab when they are 9. So that's more of a longitudinal study. We can look at it from microgenetic or even sequential, where we have a little bit of different setups to allow us to collect that kind of data. There's a lot of techniques that we use for research, especially when it comes down to the brain. We have an MRI and CT scans where it just takes static pictures of it. And then we have functional devices that allow us to look at our brain as it is functioning, whether it's an fMRI, an MEG, PET, fNIRS, and TMS. All these devices are looking at the brain as it is functioning. So in a way, the MRI or CT scan gives us information about static pictures of our brain, and the functional images like MRI, fMRI shows us what is changing as time goes on, as the individual is performing a task. So there's a lot of things with motor development. There's a lot of theories associated with it. You can see here that these T-Rexes, we assume that they're meat eaters, but we know through science and research, we know that there's a lot of animals out there in our environment that have very sharp teeth, very sharp claws that we will assume to be meat eaters, but they do not necessarily have to be meat eaters. So what I'm trying to convey here in this slide is that I'm going to introduce certain theories. Do not allow these theories to be on your mind as them being laws. So do not get them confused. A theory is a theory. It is not a law. There are certain things that are laws, but not these theories that are about to come. So we'll be looking at contributing theories, environmental context theories, biological systems theories, and applied combined model, which is the Newell's constraint. So let's just dive right in. In the biological maturation theory, Giselle, a psychologist, he tied research or behavior and development based on maturation. So he said the individual, it will not do anything until he or she is ready to do something. And that makes a little bit of a sense, but there's a lot of factors that play into it. More factors that you'll see as we go on. Bandura comes around and he talks about role modeling, about the environment, how important the environment is or was. And he talked about observational learning and how much information can be conveyed to the observer just from that individual observing. Piaget comes around, he names all these stages, but his main contribution for motor development is the emphasis of play, of exploration for kids. He said that individuals need to be able to explore their environment, so that way they could develop and understand how their system is. When we look at human development, we could look at contextualism. This is where the stress is emphasized on the context. So how important is the context? So if I was a basketball coach, I would like to have my team play or practice in a basketball court. I would like to run plays against the opposing team that I would be facing. Well, this is all about contextualism. You're putting the system into real life situations and you're putting it relevant into the context. Bronfenbrenner comes around and he starts naming that the whole system is based on the environment, and that environment influences the individual. So here you will see 5 systems. The individual is at the center. You have the microsystem, which is the immediate family members, the immediate agencies that have an influence on the individual from day to day. Then you have the exosystem, which is the extended family members, the extended agencies. The mesosystem just makes the interaction between the exosystem and the microsystem. And of course, the last system is the macrosystem, which is the attitude and ideas of the culture. And all throughout this processes, you have time being consistent. Time would change. And that individual, through time, those systems will be affected through that time. Gibson comes around and he talks about perceiving in action. So an individual needs to be able to perceive certain things in their environment, whether they're salient or relevant information, and that those information will provide an affordance to that individual. These are environmental opportunities that an individual needs to have. Some other theories are the biological systems theory. Here we have schema theory. Some of you will probably be familiar with this in motor learning class. It is a very programmatic theory, meaning that you have input, you have processes that happen, and then you have an output. So it's a very computer programming kind of theory associated with this. The next theory comes around and it's all about the biodynamics. So this one talks about how people, regardless of program, it is all about how we have our muscle groups, how we unfold those muscle groups into these subsystems, how we organize them, how we're trying to reduce the degrees of freedom, and ultimately how our brain works. And it has nothing to do with programs. Newell's constraints theory comes around. This individual, Carl Newell, he comes around and says, hey, you know what? If I was to combine the individual and the environment, I'll make my own theory, and this is what it comes out to. So in the individual, you have structural and functional capabilities, then you have task constraints, and then the environmental constraints. These 3 things either help, facilitate, or limit the behavior of an individual. So here is a little bit of a review for the 5 theories, and then of course people in careers in motor development have all these kind of careers, whether it's coaching, whether it's some kind of therapy setting, whether it's some kind of educational setting, or even business or industry like making playground equipment and things like that for individuals. All right, that concludes our presentation for Chapter 1.